Hey guys, welcome to the stream. This is the first live stream of the Lion's Pride creations, so it's going to be a little bit cringy in some moments, but just bear with me as I kind of learn the ins and outs of live streaming. Today I'm going to be working on the Fenr Beastpack. I have a couple other models that I've already painted from the line. I've got my Raiders, and I've got my Huskarls. All of them do have a teal color to them, so I wanted to kind of carry that through in this same color scheme. So I'm going to start out by putting, for the fur, I'm going to start out by putting the dark jade across the fur, and then move on to just jade. Whenever I get to the jade, I'm going to do that probably on about 80% of the model. Very similar to how I do most of the other, layering of other models. But from there, I'm actually going to take it a step further, and I'm going to start going into more of a sky blue and into a little bit lighter. So I'm going to be putting a little bit of white with the sky blue each time, and instead of doing just blank layers, I'm going to take this very small brush, and I'm just going to start flicking it across and creating the fur texture. Similar to how this guy over here is set up, where you can see he's got a lot of fur texture in his stomach. It's really pronounced on his back, and we're going to try to keep that sort of very thin line building up from the sky blue, so you have deeper parts of the coat that are a little darker, and bringing it more light with the smaller areas up top. But before I get to the fur, I do have some areas on here that are cuts and scrapes, and in his mouth there, that I want to go in with the dark magenta just to bring out the color a little bit. And because it's so far down in there, I don't want to overpaint and end up painting on top of the jade and messing up what I've probably already finished by that point. Go ahead and get that started. Again, I'm very new to this live streaming stuff. Kind of looks like there's a rather huge delay. So if I see you, I'll hopefully be able to see your message and respond to it. But if it looks like I'm taking a long time, just know that I'm either really dug into painting here, or the message hasn't quite come across to me yet. So I'm just going to go in and just add a little bit of this magenta in here. It doesn't have to be a whole lot to bring out these wounds. I'm actually going to go in probably with a wash later to bring more of a reddish or like a exposed flesh in there. And especially in some of the deeper wounds, we want to kind of put almost a white, where a white or a really, really, really light yellow, where you would see something other, similar to how if you get a pretty deep cut, you're not going to see just red. Out of the Pro Acryl line, dark magenta and the jades are by far my favorite colors. I'm addicted to that whole entire, I haven't gotten the magenta, or I think they have maybe a bright magenta, similar to how you have the dark jade, the jade, and the light jade. Some of these scratches and stuff like that, I almost kind of think that they're more scars. So I'm going to go a little differently with those. I'm not going to do the magenta in there. More than likely, I'll probably pull in another kind of lighter color, maybe a flesh tone, to kind of just do a little bit of streak in there and get it to pop out a little bit more under the flesh, or the fur. We'll also be trying to keep everything in focus. I'm pretty bad about going all the way over here, so I'm out of focus. Or I want to keep everything right here in this kind of like happy medium spot. If I start to stray, let me know. Sometimes I get really focused and forget that there's stuff going on around me. Also, my neighbors are having a party for their 2-year-old, so if you hear laughing and screaming and stuff like that outside, it's a party. I was invited to it, but I have a live stream. I have a almost 9-month-old daughter that I guess they invited us. Right, first question, what's my favorite miniature I've ever painted? That is kind of a tough call because I've painted a lot of miniatures. I've been painting since I was probably 9. Started painting Battletech and Warhammer, and painted a lot of Skaven. But they were more of a lesser quality paint job than where I'm currently at now. And I continue to grow where I'm at now. My favorite paint job that I've done is actually one that I didn't do on camera, but I have sitting right here. She's not quite done yet. This is a bust from the Archvillain games. I don't actually remember the name of it. It's like the Moon Dance, and I really liked the character, so as you can kind of see, addicted to the dark magenta and to the jades. I went with a little bit more light in the front and ended up kind of drowning the back out in a little bit of shadow. Later on, I do want to go in and kind of touch up some of the non-metallics over here, but once you spend about 20 hours on a model, it can get a little bit frustrating, so there's definitely areas that I want to go through, clean up, maybe smooth out some of the layers a little bit better. Seems like every model that I end up painting, so I'll paint a model and I'll get really good in the detail. I'll end up deciding that that's my favorite. Of course, I've got a fruit fly. Alright, so I think I'm done with the magentas here. I actually use 2 different brushes most of the time that I paint. 2 different workhorse brushes. I don't have any sable brushes. They're all synthetic, mainly because I haven't been able to justify getting a sable brush just yet. They're quite expensive. I know that they're really good for detail painting. You can get a little bit finer tip like these. You can kind of see that the tips have curled a little bit, and you might not be able to see. I don't know. You can see the tips have kind of curled a little bit. On a sable brush, if you're taking care of them, they're not going to curl, at least not as quickly. Alright, so I'm going to go, actually I'm going to get a little bit more dark jade. I have a tendency to put a lot of paint on my wet palette, but not use it all. And so I kind of waste paint in that fashion, so I'm trying to trim that down. On this model, I do see that I did a very poor job of doing the gap filling. So what I want to do with this is I want to pull a lot more texture into this to almost hide that gap that's right there that I can clearly see. I think some of the areas are a little bit better and won't show up, like this front area. This will definitely hide, but you'll see small remnants of this. I'm just going to try to hide it as best I can. Go in here. The dark jade actually has really good coverage. I think most of the time I only do one layer of dark jade, and I feel like it covers a really good portion of the miniature. Whereas some of the other ones, the yellows and reds, I always tend to have to do multiple. I think occasionally I'll have to do maybe a second coat. Oftentimes whenever I get more paint, you'll see me kind of like wick the paint on my hand. This is a test to kind of see how much paint is going to come off of the brush, or just try to get it down to where it's a easier, like I don't have just a glob sitting on the end of the brush that's just going to drop off on the miniature. A lot of people, I've seen this asked in a couple different discords actually, where someone's like, am I missing something because people keep painting on their hands? It's like, not really. You can do the same thing with a paper towel. I've got paper towels around here. I just find it a lot easier to just do this real quick. A lot of times I'll spin the brush too, which kind of gives it a little bit better of a tip. With the Pro Acryl paints, they're actually designed to where you shouldn't have to thin them out. So I don't use the wet palette to thin out my paints. I more use the wet palette to just keep the paints alive a little bit longer. I know some people, especially if I go and I get or whenever I get to the Vallejo paints, I'll have to thin out the Vallejo a lot, especially with the type of work that I'm going to be doing with the Vallejo. The really fine lines, you almost want it to just barely exist on the brush. I used to thin down the paints, the Pro Acryl paints, and I did it because you'll see me spending a lot of extra time making brush strokes. And if you thin them down, it does actually kind of branch out and make it a little easier to cover the area. But you also lose the just one coat quality of it. So spending a little bit extra time to just make sure and paint certain areas allows me to save some more time down the road and having to go through all those different areas and make another pass. One of my main goals with the channel is I really want to get to a point where I can have a basically like a 4K camera and a really good refresh rate on that camera. Just so you guys can see a little bit more what I'm doing. I was recently talking to some people up at a local gaming store that also do they do streams and videos and stuff, and they were talking about how, oh well, most of the time people are viewing on their phone. They're not really looking for a higher quality footage. And although that is kind of true, a lot of people that watch my videos probably aren't digging in that much detail with what I'm actually going through and painting in each stroke. But whenever I go and watch different channels like Ninjon and Miniac or Squidmar Games, I really like to just blow it up on kind of the big screen. I've got a 4K television and be able to see how they're doing their brush strokes. And somebody that's learning how to paint, it's really a great way to see where you might be going wrong, or just see what you might be able to do a little bit differently. And any information that I can provide to somebody who's trying to learn how to paint at a higher quality, and not have to rely on speed paints, that's the goal for my channel. I don't want to just show somebody how I painted something. I want to, in a way, provide a video guide of sorts that they can kind of refer back to and go, okay, I know I saw this. Let me dig into it a little bit further and really see if it goes, if I'm doing the fur texture on a Minotaur. I want somebody to be able to go in and see how lightly I'm touching the miniature, or how much paint I'm getting on the brush. Whenever I get the better camera, more than likely the wet palette will be in the camera view a little bit better. And if I do more live streams, I might actually do a small camera that just shows the palette. Watching the Monument Hobbies live stream gives a really cool way to see. They've got like a camera that's painting, or like on the painting desk where the miniature is, and then down on the corner they've got a small palette where you can actually see the palette choice that they use. I think they use glass palettes, which I find an interesting concept, and one day we'll test out. And then, but you can actually see how they go through how much paint they're getting on their brushes, and gives you a little bit more guidance, in my opinion. And I wanted to kind of show people that painting at a higher quality is within reach for anybody, honestly. It doesn't take too much time. It does take a little bit of patience sometimes, but it really depends on what style you're going for. If you're looking to do more of the glaze and sketch, which is something that I do more than anything else, it does take a little bit more time to go through and glaze and actually bring those layers together. Something I'm not as good at yet. But that's kind of the thing is I have models that I hold pretty highly, and a lot of people have told me that they loved this Archvillain Games miniature that I painted, and I look at it, and a lot of times I just hate how the layer lines, I can see the layer lines, and it frustrates me. But that's also something that with paint, you can actually go back at a later time, and you can clean up the process. It's not, once you've painted it, it's done and you can't touch it any longer. Even if you go through and you put, say, a varnish on it, you can still go back and paint over that varnish. It's not a bad thing. You're just going to want to re-varnish the miniature once you're done with it. I also don't use any sort of like gloss varnish. I like a more matte paint look to everything. Still working on this dark jade. It's going to be probably the longer process out of all of it, is just getting this dark jade down, because there's a lot of skin, or a lot of fur. It's going to be fur. And then on the top part where I haven't painted it yet, dark jade, I'm going to. So this whole mohawk piece here, I'm going to paint it dark jade, and then I'm going to go in and instead of going with the sky blue and the whites, I'm going to go in with a little bit of a darker blue and try to keep that darker separation to it. So I'm not getting everything the same color, the same paint, and it's good to have a little bit of a variation between everything. One of the tools that I've grown to love is, I actually really love this piece right here. This is a $1 piece of wood that I cut up into little chunks, and I've just got like a glue dot. In the floral world, it's called a glue dot. You can get it, it's just kind of a gummy adhesive that I just have on there, and it secures it pretty nicely. I know other people have spent quite a bit of money on holders and stuff like that and printed out their own holders, but just $1 piece of wood from Walmart or Home Depot. The next question is, for someone who has never painted a miniature, gets easily discouraged by messy paint lines or messing up, what do you recommend to help not get frustrated? The best advice that it took me a very long time to learn is just don't fret about if things don't look right. One of the things in miniature painting is there will come a time in this miniature alone, or other miniatures that are you're painting, where it's going to look kind of like crap. It's called like the ugly phase in a way, and most of the time that you're kind of, especially if you're adventuring into non-metallic metals and going through and doing a lot of the layering techniques, you're gonna get an ugly phase, and it's just not gonna be pretty. But if you're not really focused on the, I guess I kind of use painting as a bit of a relaxing time frame, and I actually find it uh, pretty fun. And so if I focus on all the little details and I get frustrated about, oh, this isn't really doing what I want, then I'm not really having fun with that painting process. And so going with a little bit more of a carefree attitude, and then also knowing that you can set the miniature down. You can set it down for an hour or so, or you can even set it down for a couple days and come back to it. You're gonna have a little bit more of a you're gonna have a little bit more time to kind of process, and you might realize that what you did is growing on you, or you might realize that there's another step you could take that would easily bring the project back to the position where you want it to be. So I would say just going in with a nice, clear mindset and just having fun with it, and then know that you can step away. It's not gonna, the paint's not gonna become, I guess, unpaintable after a little bit. A lot of times I will actually stop working on a miniature. So with that Archvillain Games miniature or bust, I've stopped working on it because, one, I spent 20 hours on it, which is a lot of time to spend on a miniature. A lot more time than I've spent on any other miniature. But on top of that, I believe I've done everything that my skill level can allow me to do right now. And so if I continue to paint every day or paint frequently, doesn't have to be every day, but just painting frequently, you gain more confidence in your ability. You gain more insight as to how these different techniques work, and you'll grow as a painter, and you'll look back at some of your other projects, and if it's one that you set down and you set it down because you're not at that skill level yet, you might just realize after a while, okay, I know how I can make this just a little bit better. And even if you just slightly improve something and set it back down again, that miniature will always be there as long as you keep it there. But it'll always be there, and you can always kind of jump back to it. For someone who is generally an introvert, I enjoy this sort of painting, like painting on a live stream, but it's definitely a little bit harder for me to kind of stay focused on like the painting aspect and work on the more social aspect of talking. But the same is kind of it's kind of the same with like YouTube. I've created this media presence, social media presence, and just the upkeep alone on that has pretty much, I would say, tripled or quadrupled my social media intake for the day. I used to use Facebook to look at memes, and now I post updates on painting, and I talk to a lot of different people through Discord, and constantly using those to, one, promote the channel or just promote knowledge. I enjoy sharing what I know and learning from those Discords. why if I create or since I'm creating a Patreon and I'm kind of struggling to find out what the different tiers should be, that's one reason why I don't want to do a Discord, is because there's so many Discords out there that you're gonna get a better knowledge base from a well-established Discord. I know Monument Hobbies has their uh, their Discord, and I've been on that for almost 2 months now, and I'm pretty sure that majority of what I've learned has been from just people talking in that Discord and sharing tips and tricks that they've used. So some of these further down in here areas that I'm not going to be able to get to with a brush, that's okay because I don't really need to. They're going to be hidden. In a way, you can almost call that shadow. So that's the reason why I paint. I actually prime with a dark primer, is so that the shadow sticks to kind of the more bottom areas, the areas that I can't quite reach, and you can hide almost areas that you can't quite get to with the brush. If you can't really get to it with a brush, then there's really no need to paint it because generally you're not going to see it. So might as well make it a shadow. And that kind of holds a little bit more true with like shields and stuff too. So on this guy, I painted, of course, the hand, but I couldn't quite get in there to paint the arm as well as I had wanted to. I could from this side, but I didn't. But the model itself still looks well painted. If I'm playing this on a playing field, I'm going to knock this model over all the time. If I'm playing it on a playing field, nobody's going to be turning around and looking at it and digging into it and go, why didn't you paint this one little tiny little bitty area? Well, it's shadow. It's hidden. This is a lot of dark jade. But to be fair, it'd be a lot of any other color, and I really like the dark jade, so I'm not mad about it. Just whenever I think I get down to where I don't have a whole lot left to do, I realize that there's a whole other side to the miniature. All right, so we've kind of finished up with the dark jade, so you can see a little bit of the magenta in there, and that's ultimately what I want. I don't want it to stand out just yet, that it's an open wound, but I want a little bit of magenta in there so that it's a little easier to see from a distance. I'm going to go in here. There's one that I filled in here on accident. I'm going to try to refill that with a little bit of the dark magenta. And then there's one that I completely missed. It's on the underside of this leg. There are a lot of really nasty wounds on this guy. Which I guess speaks to the strength of the Fenr Beastpack. They can withstand that many wounds and then go through and go onto a battlefield and play something else. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and grab the jade now. Yep, I'm going to knock this miniature over all the time. I'm not used to painting on this desk. I have a very small amount of space where my arms can go. And so I keep hitting like the chair that I'm on. Like I keep hitting the armrests, whereas the chair that I have downstairs in the more louder part of the house, where the actual painting desk is, I don't have armrests, so I'm not hitting them all the time. Alright, so like I said, I'm going to go through with this. I'm going to get a little bit on this brush. So I do use a size 3 round brush as kind of my go-to brush, even on smaller miniatures. I used it for all of these guys. I find that if you have a brush like this, where it's got a very thin tip part, but it's got a lot of bulk to the actual brush, you can soak up a lot more paint, and it's still got that fine tip where I can go through and do a little bit of detail and smaller areas and not feel like I'm just going back to the wet palette over and over and over again. So I'm going to go in here. I'm probably going to cover about 80% or so of the model with this. And I want to try to be a little bit more confident in my brush strokes. The more confident you are, the easier the layering ends up looking. Right now I'm still not quite to that point yet, because I keep going back. Like you'll see me go back to an area, and that's generally where I'm not as confident with that brush stroke, and so I either left a little, like too little, or a little much. Painting on camera is a very different experience because I'm trying to show you guys like what I'm doing, but it also affects how I'm doing it. So I feel like sometimes my brush control suffers because I'm on camera. It's just something I need to learn, and learn how to hold the model where I can still be in view of the camera have you guys actually be able to see it. I think the wounds on this model make it a little bit more difficult to layer. It's where I get into like a really nice streak and I'm like, oh yeah, I can continue going down this way. I end up abruptly stopping pretty quickly because there's a giant gash there or some sort of little wound. As long as I'm not pushing too deep into the brush here, which I really don't want to. I want to just kind of glide across the surface. I'm not going to get into that gash, so if I skimmed over one, it wouldn't be too much of an issue. I'm just going through, making sure and leaving the little recesses in and throughout there. When you're painting with acrylics, it's going to come off really, really bright. So when I first put a layer down, it looks super bright compared to where it's going to dry at. So don't be scared if you put down a layer and you're like, oh my goodness, that's super bright. It's going to dry, it's going to darken up a little bit. It might still be a little bit bright, but that's where you can kind of go in and glaze and even out those layers a little bit. We're not going to do that with this model because we're going to go through and try to, in a way, blend a little bit together with the fur technique. As you can kind of see, this layer is going down a lot faster. I'm not trying to overly control the brush and get it super detailed. I'll worry about that later whenever I'm doing more of the fur, but right now I'm just kind of blocking in certain areas and getting a brighter color on there. So whenever I move into the blues, I have a bright color to work with, and I'm not putting a lighter blue down on top of a really dark color. I'm also going to use this jade area as more of an area like showing where the fur is going to go. So most of these darker areas, you might have kind of the end tail whip of a fur stripe or stripe. I don't know. A piece of fur, a hair. You might have a little bit more of that in there, but I'm gonna end up staying away from those. And with the base like sky blue color, the deep sky blue, I'm going to cover a large portion of the jade. And then as I add more white, I'm going to go smaller and smaller sections. And I'm going to kind of keep it like, say on this part, I'll probably just do a little bit to bring out the topmost part of it. More of the highlighted area where the sun's going to touch. And most of the time that I start painting, I don't really have a plan or a guide as to what I'm doing. Occasionally I'll have a reference photo of, so like on the Minotaur I had a reference photo. It was just a picture of a cow. And with that cow, I kind of kept the same coloration and just tried to match the coloration. And I did a spotted texture, so I wanted to keep a very similar spot technique. Or spot layout, I guess, not technique. Even though their spots are fairly random, and that's kind of what I came down to, was as long as I made it fairly random, it was going to be good enough. Alright, so you see I'm starting to bring out some of these areas, bring them a lot lighter. That compared to this side, which of course is just all one color. So never a fan of painting like human or like humanoid people. Always wanted to paint like beasts, and so I played Skaven, which are a group of rat people, and I think this is the first game that I've picked a more human group. Granted, I think there's only two factions in this game so far that aren't human in some way. I guess there's like the Dweghome are dwarves, so they're technically not human, but they're a little bit more humanoid, like human-esque. So they're gonna have like the same sort of skin tones, and whereas like the Wadroon are they're orcs, and so you're gonna have more of green skin tone if you wanted to, or I will probably paint mine a little bit differently. I almost want to go with like whenever I get Wadroon, I almost want to go with a purple skin tone. Because I think purple skin tone on orcs is kind of cool. And you can play around with all the different skin tones whenever you get to those more beast-like or non-human-esque factions. Although I might paint my Dweghome with a more Black Iron Dwarf from World of Warcraft look, or Dark Iron Dwarf, where instead of the normal Caucasian skin tone, it's going to have like an ash sort of gray black skin tone. as I continue painting this model, you'll see I'll start to have almost a whole second palette right here, just full of paint. It's kind of an easy way to, like, if I go and say I have to remix a paint, I tend to put it on different spots. So I've got like my magenta, my dark jade, my jade. I'll probably go down a little further this way with other colors, and I can almost put it next to, if I have to remix a color, I can put it next to the other swatch of it and just see if it's the same or even just similar. If it's a little bit different, generally that's not going to matter too much. But it kind of gives me a little bit of a history of different colors. Whenever I get to dry brushing, and if I'm dry brushing something that's a really large area, I'll actually use the inside of my hand, and that's where it gets a little bit crazy though. I've always been told that I paint more on my hand than I do the model. I'm realizing on this side, so this side the muscles were pretty well defined, whereas on this side, this arm, it kind of is, and I can kind of see a little bit on this side, but not nearly as much as the other side. So I have to take that into account whenever I do the fur texture, because I'm not going to have as much darker dark jade to work with over here, because I want that contrasting color to really sell the shadow of that side. I noticed it a little bit too late. If I noticed it earlier, I probably would have put like a cut right here where it was a little bit more of the dark jade and left this dark jade, and used some areas on the miniature that were, I guess, close to a muscle or some sort of definition, and left a little bit of shadow in there. But I was just kind of going for it. I can also sell the shadow a little bit better by just not putting that top level of highlight in there whenever I do the fur. And that's more than likely what I'm going to do whenever I take into account that shadow or lack of shadow. Instead of having these already recessed shadow areas, I'll just go through and do a smaller area, probably here, smaller area here, and then one here, and leave this maybe just the deep sky blue. And that way you can kind of cheat the eye to make it look like there's not much, or look like there's more shadow than there actually was painted on the model. So I'm going in this area and doing a little bit of highlighting, but not a whole lot, mainly just to bring out some of the definition in it. More than likely, I probably won't do a lot of fur inside like on the insides of the legs. I'm going to save that more for the outside. I'll probably do some on this leg just because it stands out a lot more and it's a little bit more pronounced. You can kind of see it while looking at the miniature. But also with the amount of gashes on that leg, I don't know how much will be there. So this fruit fly is gonna bug me. I was recording audio yesterday. It was swarming me. Kept doing the same thing it's doing now, where it's just popping up randomly while I'm talking. I kept trying to get it, but I failed every single time. So on this bottom area, of course, I'm just going to go through and do a real small highlight. I'm not too worried about getting the jade here because I'm basically going to end up covering that up with some of the other paints that I'm going to do for that. And I'm also not going to do any fur technique there because it's a very small area and it looks perfectly fine the way that it is now. I might do like a thin like stripe there of a blue if I feel like it needs it, but there's probably no need to do that. Right. Getting closer. You'll see that like some areas, so right in here, I instantly stopped like right here. You'll see a little bit of dark jade, and then it actually goes into that black that I couldn't really reach. And that's what you want to see, is you want to see that the shadows get more kind of pushed back into the shadow. The more layers of highlight that you put on, the more those shadows are just going to keep kind of receding back and hiding, whether it be mistakes or just hiding kind of that area. Also, all right, so I got the jade done. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here with the deep sky blue. Probably should shake that up first. This is where you'll see me actually use the smaller brush, which my smaller workhorse is the #1 liner. I like it for most of my detail work. If I'm doing really small, thin lines, I'm going to use this instead. It's easier to get into like smaller areas or just a real thin line. The other one I can do what I'm about to do with it because it does have a really fine tip, but I don't really need that bulky of a brush to be able to do this. There's going to be a lot of water in the paint that I'm going to be using, so not needed. I'm actually going to see what the blue mixed with a little bit of jade looks like. Because I do want to keep a little bit of that jade in there for the first kind of base layer after this. So with this, I've got, I'll just do a small streak. So this is the sky blue, and then this is that sky blue mixed with jade. honestly looks a little bit like the bright jade, but I think bright jade is a little bit brighter. So we'll go ahead and start with this, where we're just going to put the jade. We're going to mix it with the sky blue. Might add a little bit more sky blue. Of course, I need more sky blue because I put a lot of jade in that mix. Did it again. Yeah, see, I like that a little bit better. All right, and to make this a little bit easier, I'm gonna add a little bit of a glaze medium from Vallejo as well. The glaze medium I'm using kind of instead of water. The only thing I don't like about glaze medium compared to water is the glaze medium takes a little bit longer to dry, whereas the water evaporates out. And so if I'm working on a very small area, I tend to realize that the glaze medium stays active on it longer. And if I just paint like this area right here, I don't get to paint for very long before I have to just set the model down and kind of move on. Whereas using water generally dries a lot faster. So it's been a bit since I've done this, but what I ultimately want to do is I want to pull the hair from kind of this direction. We're just going to do some small strokes. If I realize that the fur is a little too thick, some of those were a little too thick, I just come down here on my paper towel and I wick off a little bit of the moisture, and then I come in here. It's going to be very difficult to show on a camera. And with this one, I almost want to keep it the same size as the jade. So I'm just starting to get a little bit of texture in there. It's okay if like some of these areas I go a little thicker. And so it looks like one bulk color, but you want to keep that towards like the center of the actual model. And I'm just lightly going in there and touching. And so hopefully whenever I get a little bit of highlight in here, I doubt I'm going to be able to. I don't think that area that I didn't clean up very well is going to go away. So you want to kind of follow the patterns of how animals go. You'll see a lot of their fur kind of drop down from this side, down this way, but also backwards. And so you'll see I'm going at almost like a V shape. So this side I'm going to go this way and down backwards. And then as I'm going into the leg, it starts to curve. And it'll start kind of going down this way. The kind of pattern here does get a little bit messy with like this area, because hair, if you look at like a dog's hair, it does actually kind of go all sorts of different ways in this area. Once it comes kind of closer to the elbow, it almost looks like it kind of comes in from all sorts of areas. And as long as you're kind of accurate, it'll look really nice. Or as long as you keep a consistent flow. If you try to go too crazy with the flows, it is going to get a little bit messy and it might not look as nice. And the one thing that I need to remember on doing this fur is whenever it comes to the scratches and the wounds and stuff like that, I need to remember that the scratches and the wounds do not change the direction to which the fur is coming in. Since these are probably recent scratches and stuff, it's not likely that that fur is going to change in any sort of direction, but I will be putting almost like scar tissue around the wound. So if I get a little bit of fur right up next to it, I'm not as worried about that. What you'll notice as you keep going through and doing the lines is this first layer, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting a little bit of that texture. If it blends kind of together, that's fine. But as long as some of that jade is kind of showing through, you're doing exactly what you need to do. And then later on in the steps, when you're doing a smaller area and you're bringing a little bit lighter to it, those areas that are kind of bulkified, there's a lot of just kind of the same color in that area. You'll start to kind of even those out a little bit and it'll be less noticeable that they're kind of grouped together that way. While I'm doing this, I don't really follow a specific sort of pattern as to where I'm going next on the model. You'll actually see me kind of jump around a little bit. So I'll step back and look at the model and I'll be like, oh yeah, I need to keep going down on this side of the foot. And apologize for that. That's just kind of how my brain works. Not quite as structured. It's a little bit of a chaotic thought process. Whenever I'm doing this color, I tend to do, or this stage, I tend to do longer strokes. And then once I get into the smaller stages, we're doing a smaller area. So you're getting a lot less long strokes. And earlier I talked about how like there's an ugly stage to models, like painting models. Um, I actually kind of like this stage drives me insane because I see those big areas and I'm like, oh, this texture is not doing what I want it to do. But that's all part of the process. It's doing exactly what it needs to do. I just have to kind of keep going along and see where the model itself takes me. As I start doing more and more areas, I'll start to realize, okay, even though this section kind of looked messy, once I get the flow and you start to see all the different texture kind of in and throughout, you go, okay, it's making sense. It's doing what it was supposed to do. I was just uh, not seeing the full picture. And I think that's the hard part about miniature painting is a lot of times if you key in on those little teeny tiny details and um, you're trying to be almost a perfectionist on those details, you're going to miss out on the big picture overall. If I was to stop after I painted this part right here and just set the model down because I got frustrated, I would have never seen how cool all of this looks together. And I feel like once I moved on from this part and I got some of the other directions of the hair, the fur flowing, you start to see that big picture coming together. So just if you can power through it, there's an ugly phase in miniature painting. It's a real thing, and it happens to even the best of painters. They will tell you there is an ugly phase. Add a little bit of fur on these two legs that are kind of more prominent on this side, but the inside legs I'm not going to. I'm going to leave them a little bit more in shadow. Maybe do like a little bit in here, like just a tiny bit, because I almost want, after this wound, I want it to get lost. So we'll just kind of do a little bit of texture in there, and then whenever I do the lighter texture, I'll do a smaller area, just so the rest of it almost gets lost. All right, so we're going to go with this sort of back. Actually, I'm going to put a couple more in this. I don't know if I put too many and it kind of drowned out the color too much. I didn't put enough. Okay. So we're going to come in this back leg. And again, I'm only going to start where there's going to be like light coming to it. I'm not going to come up here, maybe in just this little spot. That's it. And I'm not going to worry about doing every kind of nook and cranny because, like I said about a lot of different parts of this, that's going to be in the shadow. Nobody's going to see it. Whatever you do, don't touch your model while you're painting. You'll get nasty fingerprints on it. Kind of like I did. But it adds to this texture, so I'm not too worried about it. I don't even know when I did that. wounds make this significantly more difficult to do. And I've noticed that on these beasts, Para-Bellum really likes to put wounds. And it's not a bad thing. Because, I mean, this is a feral wild beast. It's actually one of the rules for this character is that it's feral. And once you march with this character, it can end up going feral, and or like it can end up enraging almost and just charging the nearest group, whether you're wanting it to or not. So if I was wanting to actually move him further down the battlefield, but he goes feral, he could end up just sprinting to the closest enemy group and attacking. Which is kind of a cool tactic, and that's honestly what I would use him for, is that kind of random factor. Put people at unease with the fact that they can come in First Blood. They actually come in as they can come in as a reinforcement. So they can come in on the second turn whenever your reinforcement area is a little bit further up the board. They can come in right behind your units and go completely feral, and because they are feral, if they do a dead sprint towards one of the enemy models, and like they do a charge, and they actually make the charge, then they can attack on the turn of their deployment. So the kind of goal is to almost have them come in right by, within charging distance of an enemy unit, so that you can just get that free, like, charge that turn. Otherwise, you're just kind of waiting for them to get into the next turn. Alright, so I kind of have gotten a little bit messy on this side compared to this side, so I don't feel like it's as straight, or like as crystal clear, as good as the other side. So I'm just going to go in here and try to clean up some of it a little bit better, but I also don't want to do too much to basically create a almost full layer across the whole entire model. So I'm gonna leave this at that point. Maybe no, I'm not going to. So I'm gonna leave this at that point so that whenever I move on to the next color, I can just know I need to do a little bit better of a job at kind of wicking off the brush and go a little bit slower with it. That has always been my problem with painting, is I'm extremely impatient. Not just whenever it comes to painting, and a lot of times I just rush through and I lose track of the detail that I actually want to be putting into the model. Which I've noticed is actually quite difficult to rein in a little bit whenever you're talking while painting. Generally, I'm like almost perfectly silent while I'm painting. I like to have something playing in the background that I don't really have to pay attention to. If it's like an audiobook, I can generally follow along with it. But if it's a movie or a TV show or something like that where you're better off seeing parts of it, it's just there to make sound. Occasionally I'll paint while there's like a live stream of somebody else painting. That's just more to kind of support them, to be honest. If I'm not seeing kind of what they're doing on the paint job, then I'm not learning as much. Although sometimes good information is spread just by talking. Alright, so it doesn't look too bad. I think this side, it could have been that I just didn't have that shadow area that I really wanted. And that's why I was getting a little bit lost in the fur here. That's okay, we can rebound from that, and I'm not too worried about that. But that's kind of the first layer. The next thing that I want to do is I'm either going to mix a little bit more of the sky blue with this, unless it loses a little bit of that jade if I mix the sky blue. So I'd actually rather keep that light jade in there. I think this is where we're going to actually add a little bit of the white. So I think the white will kind of keep it in the jade category. Oop, that's a lot of white. Set a little bit. And white paint goes a long way. I don't really feel like you need a whole lot to start lightening something up. I also don't want to go too light too quickly. Because whenever you start going too light too quickly, then it just looks a little bit weird. You want to keep that depth in there. Because we are talking about fur. When you look at an animal, the fur is not the same color all throughout. It's got different areas that are lighter, different areas that are darker, and some have more patterned. Next question is, what is something that gets you excited to paint a miniature? / try a crazy color scheme. This is kind of a difficult question. Most of the time, whenever it comes, I almost see that as two separate answers. So we're going to answer it that way. Things that get me excited to paint a miniature are really the detail of the sculpt or the story behind the miniatures. So for Para-Bellum and or even like the Archvillain games, Archvillain Games has really nice 3D printed models, and anything that has really good detail always kind of gets me excited to jump in there and start painting it. I know I waited on this box from the Nords for like almost 10 days, and talking about impatience, I was extremely impatient when waiting for this box, and checked probably the FedEx status of this box for like maybe 4 or 5 times a day just to see, oh, hey, look, it left France. And then, oh, it made it to Kentucky. And kind of an unhealthy obsession with tracking this package. But I'm doing the same thing with the Dweg Home and City States Warbands that I got. And then for the color scheme, it's kind of two, that's also kind of two different answers. Trying a new color scheme, what inspires me to try like a new color scheme or kind of a crazy color scheme is actually one, it's kind of the paint, to be honest. Like the Pro Acryl line, I watched their stream pretty regularly, and I get to see them using their paints on the stream, and I can see, like, I bought this jade, and the jade has become my all-time favorite. And then on the Archvillain Games miniature, I decided to use jade and dark magenta, two colors that I didn't really think would go together. Or even like the blue and the jade here. Yes, they're close, but generally when you see the mixed boxes, you get a dark jade, a jade, a fallen miniature, and a bright jade. So you get colors that are in sequence. You start with dark, you go to jade, you go to bright jade. But ultimately in this miniature, I'm skipping this bright jade, and I'm actually taking the sky blue and mixing it with the jade a little bit to get more of a lighter blue with a tinge of jade. I do want to keep the jade alive, but I could just go sky blue and it would look pretty amazing too. I just wanted to keep the jade in there. So the paints and some of the painters or the paint companies that keep creating new lines or new paints or something like that, that's always kind of inspired me. Coming from a floral design background, see, I'm trailing off the screen here. Coming from a floral design background, colors have always sparked my interest. And it makes a lot more sense when you think, to me, it makes more sense when you think of mixing different flower colors. I never really would have thought that going through and mixing up different acrylic colors would give you the same sort of effect that it does like in a flower arrangement. I was very daring with my color choices and flower arrangements. And I'm starting to get to that point now on the miniatures. I like to try to pull in other colors where I can. I've thought about going through with a dark magenta glaze in some of these darker areas to make the shadows pop a little bit more. And so that's a kind of a crazy color combination that normally it might not be something you think about, but it's definitely something that you can do that adds either further depth. And then the other answer to that question, if it's not the paint companies and the different paints that they're coming out with, it's actually the more advanced YouTubers, so Ninjon and Miniac and Squidmar that I've been watching, that they'll go through and they'll do this really awesome paint job. And what makes it super awesome to me might not be the focal point of their video, but it's the thing that I learned from their video. And it's just how they used certain colors. So, generally from outside sources, whether it be the paint company or the people using the paint. Short answer, paint. I am going in with that little lighter color and just pulling out the shadow a little bit more. I thought I already did the other side, but I guess I didn't. What led me to do the fur technique and learn how to do the fur technique on the Minotaur was I was looking at the Para-Bellum web store because whenever I was talking to them, they basically told me, hey, we're going to send you a miniature. We're going to send you our box of Minotaurs. And the way that he described it to me, originally, before he told me that they were the Minotaurs, he said, we're going to send you one of our simplest models. And that kind of confused me a little bit because whenever I think simple, I think of just like a Monopoly piece. Just something super, super duper simple. And something that I wasn't really thinking I could get behind painting. If I don't like the sculpt, it's definitely more difficult for me to paint the sculpt. And so I was a little bit worried about that. And then he told me that it was the Minotaurs. And I was like, well, I mean, technically, it can be simple to paint a Minotaur. You can go through and just paint like a base layer, or paint a base layer, then you can wash it and do like a quick highlight over the top. Or you can make it not simple. And that's whenever I went on the site, I actually saw that Demo, their box artist, had painted them and given them just a little bit of a fur texture. And it's not something I've ever done before. And I really wanted to wow them. I wanted them to say, holy crap, this guy can paint. But I also wanted to challenge myself, and that's kind of where I went with that. So I ended up looking up a ton of different YouTube channels, and found a lot that weren't really what I was looking for. But what I ended up doing was taking a lot of the information that was shared in those and doing test miniatures so that I could see how what I was gonna do reacted, and once I did the test miniatures, I could kind of go, okay, this wasn't gonna work, or to get that fine of a fur, I needed to buy different brushes because my brushes sucked at the time. So I needed brand new brushes that were pretty much almost perfect. Then I found these, and like, I would say that these are probably a little bit bent and a little harder to control than a brand new brush would be. But when I was doing that video, that Minotaur was supposed to be kind of a personal project. That wasn't supposed to be in my video. I wanted to paint a dairy cow patterned Minotaur, and then I was going to paint one for them because I wasn't sure if the dairy cow pattern was going to turn out well. I've seen other people paint that sort of dairy cow look, and it looked really kind of campy and just didn't look right. Or like you lose a lot of value in the whites because people would just paint just white. And it's like you can't start out with just white. If you start out with just white, you have no definition in the paint scheme. So you almost, like, I didn't paint any white on that model, but it actually reads as white fur, and that's because I slowly went from kind of a darker shaded area and brought in the lighter areas, brought in like the lighter shades, and went to a almost white. It was definitely like an off-white or like a grayish white as the final touch, and it reads as white. And so once I finished with that video, like I've learned that I need to record everything, because if I don't record everything, I miss out on videos that I think could actually be beneficial videos, showing tactics, stuff like that, that I either learned while I was painting or learned for that painting. And a lot of times I think, oh, it's just a test, I don't need to film it. And I realized that I should have filmed it because it ended up being my favorite model. Or actually the other day I painted this guy here. So this is Rusty, the Junkyard Racer. And I painted him for the Monument Hobbies May Challenge. If you join their Discord, you can actually go look at their May Challenge. And right now it's basically selling something as metal without using metal paints. And it doesn't always have to be non-metallic metal. So I went through and did like rust. I made it to where it looked super rusty. I don't have a video for this because I just went and painted it one night. And it's like, oh, I don't need a video for this. This is just me doing a challenge. It's playing around, testing out a new way to do it. That, and also I think the fact that it was the mostly done with an airbrush is like, I don't know how to film the airbrush stuff just yet. It's a very difficult thing to film. But the moral of that story is I challenged myself to learning something new, because the way that somebody made something seem as a simple model, and it's like, well, it doesn't have to be simple. I can make it not simple. All right, so we're almost an hour into this, and you can start to really pick out where it looks like fur. If you were to say I'm done here, nobody would really complain about this. They would say, "Oh, that looks really cool." Um, you could do that, and we've spent about an hour doing this. Of course, I'm gonna take it further. I'm gonna keep going with this. I'm gonna add a little bit more white. So I've still got about an hour, hour and a half left. And so we're going to add a little bit more white. I want it to really be a bit more of a contrast than the last one that was on there. Because I feel like I want to really start bringing that out. So now we're going with something that's really what I would call sky blue. So the other was deep blue. This is more of a sky blue. And we are going to start kind of losing a little bit of that jade in here as I keep adding white to it. And that's fine for this stage. So I'm actually going to get a little closer, and we're just going to come in here and just do a small little area in here. I'm trying to keep my brush strokes smaller. It's not always the easiest thing to do in certain areas, but I just want to bring out a little bit more of these areas. And as I get lighter, I'm trying to do less and less areas where it easily kind of clumps together. I'm trying to do less and less of that. So I'm being a little bit more picky on where I'm placing the brush. I'll slow down a little bit and focus a little bit more heavily on that. So in areas up here where like I have a full shoulder pad here, I can come in and I can do like this area. Where I think the light is going to hit the most. And I'll probably actually carry it down just a little bit here. I don't want it to come too far down, but just a little bit. So I have it more centered up here. And then the next time that I come through and I do like even lighter, because I do want it to be even lighter, I'm going to just do it in this small area right here, just to pull that color in. And I'm going to do kind of almost little teeny tiny areas going through. And every time I do that, it's going to be a lot faster of a step. So as you start getting closer and closer to done, it gets faster and faster. And then I'll purposefully kind of leave out areas like down here whenever I get into that area. I don't want to do that because that's less light is going to be hitting that area. I just want to do the little areas where the light's kind of really kind of prominent. And not really liking the face of it too much. So I might do something different there, but we'll see how it turns out overall. nose I'll probably end up painting a different color. Or at least part of the nose. I'll reference the picture and see. A lot of times I'll take a look at the box art, and even if I don't do the same color scheme, it kind of tells me a little bit more about what the company decided like that part of the model was. So there's often times where I'm looking at something and I'm like, I don't know what that is. That doesn't make any sense to me. I'll look at the box art and go, oh, okay, that's a piece of leather, or that's like just a little trinket or relic that they're wearing. Is there any type of miniature that I would, or any kind of miniature that I would never want to paint? I would say ones that just lack detail. It's very difficult to paint ones that lack a lot of detail. So if you look at like a standard Monopoly piece, it just doesn't have a whole lot of detail, and it doesn't drive me to want to paint that. And even going like back in the early days of war games and their miniature design, where they were a little limited in what they could produce. You see that lack of detail in there. So recently, I haven't really wanted to paint BattleTech miniatures. Whenever I saw the Monument Hobbies challenge, a lot of people were doing BattleTech, and they were talking about doing BattleTech. I think some of the people that actually work there are going to do BattleTech for that challenge, and I just don't. I get the appeal of the game itself, because it's a very nostalgic game. Like, my dad played BattleTech for a long time, both the card game and the miniature game. Even when those weren't in fashion, he was playing the there's like a simulator game of it, not like MechWarrior and BattleTech on the computer, but like there's actually somebody took the BattleTech war game and created like this program. It's very basic, and he would play that. So it does have a nostalgic factor to me, and I want to paint them. Like, I feel like I should at some point in time. But I think it has to be like the right mech. I just haven't found that mech yet. I'm realizing that the paint has kind of lost a little bit of its ability to go on there smoothly. So I'm going to add a little bit more of that glaze medium, because I have been adding paint to it. And each time I do these layers, I almost want them to be thinner and thinner each time, because you want them to be almost translucent. So I'm going to add a little bit more of that glaze medium to where it's kind of just barely there. realize that as I'm talking, I want more, like, I want to drink something, but I ran out of my drink before I even started the stream. Like, I brought it up here to have it up here. So whenever I started the stream, I had a drink. Well, I drank it before I even started. I do plan on doing more live streams, more kind of painting tips videos. I've thought about doing some Conquest play videos as well, like just showing me and the guy that I'm actually going to be meeting up with today to play some First Blood. Seeing if we can do some either live videos or record some play videos. But before I do that, I think I want to really focus on helping get the community, the Para-Bellum community, or the Conquest community here in our area, and then worry about getting more kind of Conquest content for the channel. I talk a lot about them, and it's not really something that has to do with, like, I have the affiliate link. You can go to the link in the description. You can check out there, and that actually helps support, or that helps me. It does send me a little bit of a kickback, but really talking about Para-Bellum and painting these miniatures, it doesn't have anything to do with monetary value. Like, I could care less if Para-Bellum wanted to pay me an affiliate link, or pay me through, like, the affiliate link. I don't get a whole lot from the affiliate, and that's fine with me, because what I'm more invested in is the actual models, the type of gameplay that it is. Just watching some of the playthroughs, and before I even played the game, got me pretty excited about it, which then led me to reach out to Para-Bellum. So it wasn't even just trying to build up the channel much. It was more, I wanted to learn more about the game, and I wanted to help support the game in any way that I could, because I think it's a great game, and I want to make sure that people out there can see it. But if you want to support me a little bit in building this channel, and you wanted to get into Conquest, I definitely suggest using that 10% off coupon. I believe it's only usable once. I'm not too sure about that. At least the coupon itself. And then once you've used the coupon, I think it makes, like, any purchase after that, I think, comes, a small percentage comes back to me. But I highly suggest getting into the game. They've got new starter packs coming out May 26th for, like, one-player starter packs for all of their armies. And from what I saw of the Nords one, I'm going to be playing Nords pretty heavily, just because I like the Norse mythology and stuff like that, and I feel like the lore that they gave the Nords, it follows suit with Norse mythology, but you also have this added dimension of the Spires, which are this alien faction of sorts, in a way corrupting this Norse mythology. So the gods, Loki and Odin and stuff, weren't actually gods, they were these spires faction people. And I find that really kind of clever that they were able to kind of keep in Norse mythology and what they believe and put their own spin on the game and give them an almost villain, like a villain for the Nords. And they have giants, and they have these beast packs, and it's a little bit more like animalistic, like they're kind of reverting in a way to their more animal ancestry of sorts. If you ever want to take a giant lore dive into Conquest, I believe it's 2+ Tough makes lore videos, and I highly suggest watching the lore video for the Nord trolls, because it is one of the like craziest lore videos in my opinion, or craziest lores for kind of any race in any game. And it's really not even like a race. It's just a small unit in the Nord faction, and just how they became trolls is pretty neat. Alright, so this side definitely looks a lot better. So I'm going to try to change that. I'm going to come in here with a little bit of this dark jade. And I'm going to try to separate out some of this area here, just to try to gain that definition back. Because that paint got a little bit old, there's not a whole lot left of it on the palette. I'm going to get some new, fresh dark jade. Like I said, I'm just going to kind of go in here and try to get a little bit more definition built back into this area. So I'm going to start with just doing like the dark jade in there, and then I'll probably take the kind of jade mixture that we made at first, and try to add that back in here. Thought I was going to be able to fix it, and then I just kept making it worse. So that's okay. That's what we can. That's one reason why, like painting, you shouldn't fear painting. So just even doing this, I can start to see more definition again. Definition that I lost because I was being a little bit more careless with the brush. In some areas like this where I'm just going through and cleaning up a small little portion, I almost don't even have to go back through with that other color. We'll kind of come over here. I'm going to look around the model just to see what are areas that I kind of messed up on a little bit. Like I really don't like this. I'm going to do that, and we're going to try to cheat that a little bit. Really like this side. This side worked out really well. I think in sort of this area, we're going to add a little bit of shading there. I could be doing this with a glaze, but it would have kept some of that texture. I'm not worried about that. Problem is I need to mix a little bit more of that paint. Definitely used up all of that deep sky blue mixed with jade. Add a little bit more jade in. Alright, so I'm back to that kind of first color, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it on the brush here. I'm going to wick off some of this extra, and I'm just going to kind of flake it in on the outside. I don't want to do too much because that's how we lost the definition in the first place. So I'm just going to kind of add a little bit of texture. You can even kind of go over areas that had the have the other colors, and what it does is it'll add like almost a further variation. So like this area, I don't like some of that, so I can kind of go in here and I can darken up some of those areas a little bit. Get a little bit more variation there. I don't know why I just did that, but that's fine. We're just kind of teasing the eye back to saying, oh yeah, this is how we did it in the first place. Even though it wasn't. I like that a lot better. We're going to come in here. It's not perfect, and I think if I would have done it better in the first place, it would look a lot better. But if I would have done it right in the first place and didn't get too antsy to kind of move on. All right. So we're at that point. I think I need to go in with this on this side. And do not gonna lie, I don't know how people go through and stream for like 4 or 5 hours. I think it's something you have to almost work up to, is since this is the first one that I've done. I'm like, man, I'm running out of stuff to talk about. Just painting away. All right, so the next step that I'm going to do, I like where it's at now. I think it looks really good. This side looks better than this side. So I'll just face him this way most of the time. Anytime somebody looks at him, be like, hey, look at this model. No. I think they both add up pretty well. Like, if you're looking at this from a distance, you can still see that there's clear texture in this model, and I think that's kind of the purpose of this army. Like, my other guys aren't painted super fantastic. Like, I mean, they've got good detail on them, but they're definitely a little bit messy. But from afar, they look really good. And that's kind of what I want to go with on this. I wanted to add more detail to it because it is more of a model that stands out on the field. And I wanted people to see it and be like, oh my goodness, that's really cool. And I'm going to be using this Warband kit to do demos in my area. And a lot of times with demos, if I go into a game shop and even if I go in there saying I want to demo a game, I'm going to look for the game that kind of piques my interest the most. And as a painter or somebody that's like pretty artistic, the ones that are fully painted are the ones that I look at. And that's not saying that you can't play a game without a fully painted army. People do it every day. It doesn't change the game. The game is still a great game. But I'm more attracted to a fully painted army. So where I'm going to go with this guy next is, even though I've got the brighter blue, I'm going to go in with just a flat white. I'm going to put barely any on the brush. Like, I don't want this to come off super quickly. And I'm going to go in here on some of these areas, and I'm going to do just a little bit, maybe a little bit more on the brush than that. I talked too long. And it's okay if it mixes with the blue a little bit, so that it's kind of like a bluish white. This is where I'm going to carefully just kind of go in and place this on the highlighted section. Of course, that's not working for me. I think I do need to thin it down just a little bit, but not too much, because if you thin it down, it tends to start to spread and makes it makes a fatter line, but you can also end up with a non-thinned down paint. You can make fat kind of blotches, kind of like I did there. Alright, it's getting a little bit on. Yeah, it's a little bit more like what I wanted. So I just want to just basically go in there and just do little teeny tiny streaks. And I'm only going to do this in certain areas. I'm not going to do it on every part that is that last area that I did, because I want it to still... Sorry, it does take a lot of concentration. I actually don't quite like it too much. One technique that you can do is, if you don't like something, it's pretty fresh on there, generally you can add a little bit of water to your brush and just kind of rub it over the surface, as long as you're not doing it too heavy. It'll actually come up. This one's not coming up quite as much as I wanted it to. So we're not going to do that blue or that white step. I think it's a little too much. So I'm going to come back in here with the step before it and just try to tone those areas down that I messed up on. And we'll call it good. And we'll move on to one of the other areas. All right, so for the mane and the tail, we're going to go a little bit of a different route. So instead of going to the Jade, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use a flat blue, and I'm going to mix that with the dark Jade. The flat blue is a little bit lighter, and so it will make the paint just a little bit lighter. And we're just going to go through and do a layering and see how it looks. Actually, I'm going to do this with my larger brush. Maybe not. Maybe we'll do this with the smaller brush. I don't generally paint hair this way, but I wanted to do it. You can go through and dry brush the hair, and it works out pretty well, but I wanted it to be a little bit more of like a smoother. A lot of times when you're going through and you're layering paint onto a miniature, it almost looks like it's not doing anything. So you can kind of barely see this color up against that dark jade. But the next layer that I do, I'll do in a smaller section, and you'll see it a little bit better, and it'll blend a lot smoother than if you just go to a completely different color. So some of these larger areas I'll go fill in, and then some of the smaller ones I'll just kind of hit the top of it a little bit. I do want the dark jade to kind of shine through a little bit too. I'm not trying to get solid coats of this. I kind of want the different textures and feels. Although this is coating pretty well, it's slightly transparent. But that's what I want. I don't want that perfect one coat paint on this guy. The idea with this warband is I'm going to paint it to get it on the playing field. As I kind of stated before, I don't like playing without a fully painted army, and that's personal preference. I just think it's really cool to be able to play with a fully painted army. And so after my Warhammer Skaven days, where I had like millions of little rats that I just never could keep up with, and they were always just primer, and it looked terrible. I kind of vowed to myself that I would always play with a painted army. Like if it was my army, I'm going to bring a painted army to play with. And so today, since we're going to be playing First Blood, I want to play this group. And I've been waiting. I've had everything else pretty much painted for almost a whole week now. Besides like the filming issues that I kind of had with the camera. I actually got quite a few videos lined up that I can go through and do. So I'll have a video for painting the Valkyries that come in the kit, painting the Huskarl, and painting the Volva, which I feel really weird saying that on YouTube for just the proximity of the name. But I'm gonna have to get over it because that's the character. It's a female shaman in Norse mythology. But it's just really, really close to other words. Or other word. So in a way, what I'm doing on this area is I am going through and doing what I would consider a wet brushing of sorts. So not a dry brush, because to me a dry brush is you're going through with very minimal sort of paint on your brush. It is technically still wet, like the brush is still wet. The stuff that comes off is like the paint that's still active paint, but you're trying to wick it down to where there's like just nothing left besides just a little bit of that active paint. And you're using a dampened brush to do it. You don't want to do a dry brush with a completely full dry brush. You want there to be a little dampness to the brush before you add paint to it. But for this, what I mean by like what I would consider wet brushing is I'm putting a very similar amount of paint on the paintbrush as I would painting other areas, but I'm almost gliding over surfaces. So if things are close to, so in like this area, if I just go like this, it adds paint to multiple different surfaces at the same time, and it allows me to kind of cheat through painting each one individually. You lose a little bit of detail when you do it that way, but that's a detail I'm fine with losing on this area, especially with a paint that is kind of barely noticeable. As I'm starting to paint more of it, I can see it a little bit better against that dark jade, but it's not as noticeable, and so losing some of that detail is perfectly fine. In some areas that are longer, I can't really do that. Same style. It's really these short haunches of fur that it works well on. In here, I'm almost just going through, and since there's like I can see individual hairs and stuff like that, but to save time, I'm almost creating my own hair strands as I'm painting over it, and speeding up that process of painting that. The end result is to paint it pretty well to where there's quality, and I can go back whenever I've got this army fully painted. I've got my other demo armies, I'll have them painted up as well, and whenever I get those in, and then I'll go through and just kind of do small details on them afterwards. I don't have to have them flawlessly perfect. I can get them to a point where they look really good, but I could go through and add a little bit more detail to it to really make them shine. And that's the state that I want them, all of these kind of armies, to be at once I've got them painted. I think I was trying to get to that earlier and I got sidetracked. I don't know if I fully said that whole statement. Anytime I'm sitting here painting this first like highlight or the base coat, it always drives me nuts how long it takes. And then I end up getting to a point where it's just kind of like the next highlights and stuff like that are a lot easier because there's less to go through and highlight. You're doing a smaller and smaller section each time, and it makes it so much easier. And faster to do. So we got that layer. Actually, there's one little area. It's got a beard. And mutton chops. This kit came with a couple different heads that I could choose for this guy. But because these models are coming from Greece, a lot of times the packaging is a little bit beat up. And I think one of the heads, whenever I pulled out the sprue, it was missing. But I looked at the bottom of the box and the head was there. So I feel like it kind of popped out during transition, I guess. And it came off the sprue in such a way that it looked damaged. So I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to use this one head. I'm not going to use the other one. Even though the other one I think had some cooler features to it. It also came with another arm that I could use that was more of like a, I think this paw right here. No, it's this one. So this one, like the paw itself was more reaching out like it was going to slap something. I wanted it to have more of a kind of hunter hunting its prey sort of a thing, not an attack mode. Go in here and get some of this down in here. I'll probably leave that without highlighting it in later sections, but oops. If you ever do end up getting paint on the model, like I said before, just come in with a wet brush. Wet it down a little bit. As long as you do it quickly, you can generally go through and clean off that part. And you don't ruin as much of your paint. Next I'm going to go in with that same color, but I'm adding some white to it. And this I'm going to put on just the very kind of tips of it. And I'm going to start out actually with this top part, because it might be that I want to leave like the bottom part the way it is, but I haven't decided yet. So we're going to do the top part, and we're going to see what it looks like with almost a frosted tips look. Go in here, get a little bit closer down in this back end. I'm still not sure about it yet. You always want to draw a little bit more attention to the face, so like getting that one close isn't a bad thing. So highlighting the faces of your miniatures a little bit more than the rest of the miniature actually ends up looking really good, because you want people to focus in a little bit more on the face. Unless you don't. If there's another area on the model that you think is more appealing, you can certainly go and highlight that more and kind of draw their attention to that. So like if you really wanted to bring out his wounds and stuff like that, you could make this whole section brighter. So in a way, I kind of did that with this up here by adding that white texture into, or that white into it. I wasn't able to get that white to go back down. So all that's going to do is once I start to kind of work on this wound, it's just going to bring this wound into light a little bit more, which I'm not opposed with. So it's kind of a gnarly looking wound. I think I do like the more frosted tips look, so I think we're gonna do that, and then whenever it comes to like, I'm gonna do one more layer after this one, and I'm gonna push it really, really light and just do like even more, just the very tip of the hair. So keeping the dark jade closer to the model, and as the hair kind of falls back past, we'll lose that dark jade and go into lighter. I think it looks really good. Add a little bit more dark jade. I used a ton of dark jade ever since I bought this bottle. Like I guess I'm only about halfway through it, but at some point I will have to get more because it's by far my favorite color. I got the fruit fly. One of them. Whatever I don't finish on this stream, I will probably end up saving for another video at some point in time, where I actually go and I take the stream, cut it down to bits and pieces that are more in line with a 15 to 18 minute long video, and show kind of like the end result of the model. I don't think I'm going to get to the wounds and stuff like that before I run out of time here. Generally, whenever I'm painting, I actually end up stepping away pretty close to where I'm at now, where I start seeing that I'm doing stuff that's a little bit more careless, and it's one of those, like, my patience kind of wears thin, and I'm much less patient. Kind of like what I'm doing now, where I'm just kind of going through and blocking in some the tail part here, being a little bit more careless with it. Doesn't look bad, I just could be doing it better. so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the white again. I'm going to bring a little bit more white into this mixture. Actually, I think a lot more white into this mixture. And we're just going to do like the very, very tips of the hair coming off. A little bit more. I knew I didn't do these with the other one, but I think it's kind of needed. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Oops. A lot of times when you get pretty careless with kind of where you're placing stuff, if you go back over with, if I was to go over with a glaze of the dark jade, it would actually pull down those parts that I was not really paying much attention, or I did a little stupidly, and kind of tone it down a little bit to where it looks like you meant to do it. So that's probably what I'll end up doing whenever I do revisit this guy, probably either tonight or tomorrow. To finish up the video, I'll just take the dark jade, go over it, and just do a real quick glaze. Bring it down a little bit and even out all those layers. So kind of as a final look at of this model, before I end the stream here, I think I did some pretty good base foundational stuff. I have the fur right about where I want it. The different top fur and haunches and stuff like that, I'm gonna go over with the glaze of the dark jade a little bit later, and then from there it's really getting the kind of skin around the wounds. I want to bring that, probably do a flesh tone for that, and then doing the eyes, painting the teeth and the claws. So we're pretty much almost done. There's, I would say, about 30-45 minutes worth of work left to do on the miniature. And that's not really including the base. I'll go through and do a base similar to how I do these guys. But for the most part, like, I would consider if somebody brought this up to a game store and was like, hey, look, I painted this model. This is a fully painted model. Like, this was a fully painted model an hour ago. It doesn't take much to have a fully painted model, and it's nothing to be scared about to go through and just try it. You don't have to do the fur techniques, and as you can see on this side, I mess up from time to time on them. It's a difficult technique. As you're sitting there doing it time and time again, you're doing thousands of little ticks with the brush. It gets frustrating, and those are things that any painter understands. And a lot of the more advanced techniques, they do get frustrating the longer that you do them. So if you're sitting there for 4 hours doing the same thing, I get that. It's a little daunting and can be frustrating. So generally that's whenever I kind of step away. Like right now, I feel like I've been doing quite a bit, and so we're gonna put the model down, and to save you guys the time and trouble and stuff like that, we'll kind of end the stream there, and I will release a video with the kind of how this guy finished out, and that way you can see him with the army all together. All right, you guys have a great day.